Hi, folks. Everybody hear me
Yes.
and see me?
Yeah.
I took this picture this morning. It is still dumping snow. I think we're over 6 inches now. Who knows when it'll stop? But they're saying around 5 o'clock, but I don't know how much we'll get. I'm going to share my screen here now. We should have nothing but the program. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everybody. I want to talk to you about Bermuda's mystery roses. And a few of you who have been in the Central Florida Society for many years will have heard some of this before, and I'll apologize for that. But I realize there's a good number of us that are newer than that. So, anyway, that's the subject for today. A little bit about Bermuda to start with. It was discovered in the early 1500s by a Portuguese guy, Juan de Bermudez, and that's where it got its name. But it was not occupied then permanently by people until 1609, when several ships from England were headed for the Jamestown colony, and there was a big storm that drove some of them to Bermuda. And the crew of the ship Sea Venture made it safely to shore, and some of those people stayed there and became the first permanent residents. Shakespeare wrote The Tempest about that shipwreck. 2 years later, the people who were there, many of them wanted to go on to Jamestown. And so they used the local wood, which is a Bermuda cedar, to build two ships, Deliverance and Patience. And they took those on to Jamestown. But some people stayed in Bermuda. And then of those that went to Jamestown, some of them got disillusioned with it and came back to Bermuda. So that makes up the beginning population of the islands. So people often think Bermuda is somewhere down in the Caribbean near Jamaica, which it is nowhere near. It's out in the Atlantic. The closest land is North Carolina. They have warm, humid summers and cool, but never freezing winters. I don't think they ever go much below 50 degrees. And they are in the path of a lot of hurricanes. It's a self-governing British colony or overseas territory. They have a parliament and a Supreme Court. There's a governor who officially represents the king, but they really are self-governing. And they're divided into 9 parishes, kind of like we have counties. The whole island is 21 square miles. It's 14 miles long, and you're never more than 1.5 miles from ocean. So in a hurricane, you're going to get salt spray and that sort of thing. It's actually made up of many islands, but the major ones that are occupied by residents have bridges between them. So it feels like one island, and they often refer to it as the island, singular, of Bermuda. I want to talk a little bit about Stephen Hopkins, who I have a connection to. He was on the Sea Venture, and he went on to Jamestown then in the Deliverance, but eventually returned to Bermuda. And at some point during that, he was tried for mutiny and found guilty. And they sent him back to England then for sentencing, and he was sentenced to death. But he talked the authorities into exiling him to America on this new ship, the Mayflower. And I am his great, 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 great grandson. So that's my connection to Bermuda. This is a replica of that ship Deliverance that stood in St. George's Harbor. It was falling into disrepair, and so the last time I was in Bermuda, they had removed it, and I don't know that they have any plans to replace it, which is kind of too bad. You used to be able to tour that ship. This is the main town in Bermuda. There's only one big town, that is Hamilton. There's a smaller town, St. George. But this is the main town, and this is where cruise ships come in and where most of the shops and that sort of thing are. Bermuda is known for its beautiful water, and it also has pink sand beaches. This picture doesn't show it being very pink, and it isn't really bright pink as you might think, but it has a noticeable pink cast to it. A little bit of interesting sociology. The island is quite crowded, lots of people. And so residents are only allowed to have one car per household. So no matter how many drivers there are in your family, you can only have one car. You are allowed, though, to have multiple scooters. And so lots of families have scooters and they use them when somebody else needs the car. As a foreigner, if you go and visit, there are no car rental agencies. You're forbidden to drive. You are allowed to rent a scooter and risk your life on one. I don't think I would ever try that. But in any case, you can't have a car if you're not a resident. So a lot of people take the public bus system, which is quite good. And if you do visit Bermuda, I would recommend that highly. It's a good system. It's certainly affordable. And the buses go pretty much everywhere. Well, let's talk a bit about roses in Bermuda. There are records that there were roses being grown there in the 1600s. So they've had them for a very long time. And the Bermuda Rose Society then was founded in 1954. And as far as we know, they are the first society in the world that was really created in order to preserve their own heritage roses. Of the roses they grow, there is this group that they call mystery roses. And that's because they don't really know their origin or identity. Some of them were probably brought from overseas and they simply lost or forgot their names. Others might be seedlings or sports that occurred on the islands. But in any case, they are, and some of them have actually been identified as roses from somewhere else. But as long as they are not sure of their true identity, they refer to them as mystery roses. So my experience with Bermuda and the Bermuda Rose Society, I first went there in 1987 when the World Federation of Rose Societies had a regional conference, and I spoke to them about our rose mosaic heap therapy program, which was brand new back then. And on that trip, a group of us packed up rooted plants of the mystery roses and sent them to the Huntington Botanic Garden in California. Almost all of those died from slow shipment and problems with customs and all that sort of thing. And so it was pretty much a failure. The curator of that garden did go back to Bermuda about a year later and did successfully take them back to the Huntington. So the Huntington actually had Bermuda roses before we did at Florida Southern. Then a year later in 1988, my parents and I went to Bermuda on vacation. And while I was there, I conducted a workshop on rose propagation, and members gave me budwood of most of the mystery roses. And I brought those back to Florida. I had a federal import permit, and at that time, it wasn't too difficult to bring in rose budwood. If there had been soil, that would have been another matter. But I grafted them. They had to go through 2 years of quarantine at the college, which they did, and then they were released. So as far as we know, nearly all, maybe all of the Bermuda mystery roses that are available commercially in the US came through Florida Southern's gardens at some point. I went back in 2004 to speak at their 50th anniversary on the performance of their roses in Florida. And then I went in 2012 on a vacation trip with my sister. And then 2015 again, I went back and spoke at their annual ag show, which is like a county fair. And then 2016, Florida Southern College, most of you know, has their program they call Junior Journey, where we take students on trips. And so I took a group of students there, and Alicia went with me as a chaperone on that trip. And then most recently, 2024, they had their 70th anniversary, and I went back and did propagation workshops with the society as well as with the Parks Department. In 1987, when they had that World Federation meeting, this was a set of postage stamps that their post office put out. They've actually done more rose-based postage stamps since then. Actually, these stamps, the only one that is a mystery rose is that top middle one, the Smith's Parish. All the rest of those are known old roses that are grown in lots of other places around the world. The Society has published 3 books over the years. This one is their first one, came out in 1984. It was revised in 88. That one is almost impossible to get a copy of these days. I've actually seen it for sale on Amazon for over $1,000, and it's just a little paperback. So if you want one of those, you better want it pretty bad. You're not likely to get one. Their second book then came out in 1997. I don't know if that one's available at all. Certainly both of those are out of print. And then their revised version in 2013 came out, and I think this one is still available, at least from the Bermuda Rose Society. I'm not sure who in the US might be selling it. So anyway, that's a good source of information on their roses. This is back in '87. That's Charles Walker and Ruth Knopp packing up those roses to be sent to the Huntington. And just a couple of their members here, Lorna Mercer, who most of these folks now have passed away, unfortunately, but Lorna donated most of the budwood that we brought to Florida. So not quite all of the varieties that we grow, but most of them came through Lorna's garden. And this was the old rose garden at Florida Southern. Some of you who were here before we built Ruth's Rose Garden may remember this. And so the row going down the middle, the red and white ones, those are Double Delight. That was a virus performance test. But then on the upper right, that row against the fence, that's the original outdoor planting of the Bermuda Mystery Roses at Florida Southern. In Bermuda, the National Trust has an estate called Waterville, and in that property, they have a garden, which the Bermuda Rose Society is responsible for. That's Rosemary there in the picture. And in that garden, they use it as a display garden to show their Bermuda Mystery Roses, as well as other roses that do well in Bermuda. And so if somebody new to their society is wondering, well, what does well here? They can recommend to them, well, go see the garden at Waterville and see what you like and how they're doing. This is a group of their members when we visited, and most of those folks are gone now. The year that we took the students, this is Alicia. This was at their 50th anniversary. Charles Walker, who was the president of the Heritage Rose Foundation at the time, was speaking. And that rose on the podium next to him is Yellow Mutabilis, which is not really a mystery rose, but it did originate in Bermuda. And I have pictures of it later here. One of the things their society is known for is their extravagant arrangements. So I put a few of those in just for you to see. These were for their 50th anniversary celebration. The government of Bermuda has a nursery where they produce plants for their public landscaped areas at Waterville, and they allow the Rose Society to use an area there. They have a little bit of land as well as a hoop house and a mist bed, and so the society propagates roses there, and then they hold an annual plant sale, which is one way they distribute the roses. Something they used to do, I'm not sure if they still do, but I've always thought it was a great idea. They used to give one of their mystery roses as a gift to any new member of the society. So I've always thought that was a nice idea. I hope they still do that. This is at Waterville, and these are some of the plants they're getting ready for their sale. They sell them in 2-gallon pots. Everything's grown on its own roots. The mystery roses do fine that way. And then this was at their 70th anniversary at a show. They do two types of exhibits in Bermuda. In their monthly meetings, they often have what they just call the bench, where people can bring in roses from their garden and show them without the nervousness of being judged, people who are afraid to show a rose because it might get insulted. You can bring them and put them on the bench, and people will compliment you and say, isn't this great? But then they also do formal rose shows, which are judged very much in the same way as an American Rose Society show would be judged. In fact, some of our judges conduct judging schools there to train Bermuda judges. So this was a judge show at that 70th anniversary. One of the classes that they do that you don't often see in the US is the shadow box exhibit. So the idea there is to take a picture frame that has a black matte background box behind it, and you put an actual bouquet inside the box with the idea of making it look like a painting. And some of the rules for that, of course, the usual rules you would have where you want the flowers to be fresh and that sort of thing. But in addition, it needs to look like a painting. So nothing dares stick out in front of the frame, and nothing dares brush against the sides of the frame where it would be bent. It really needs to look like it was painted in there on purpose and at the right scale. And then just some of their collections exhibits. They also had a photography exhibit there. This was during the judging. I was not part of that, but I got permission from the judges to come in and take some candid shots. And this was their first prize winner for the show. They didn't call it Queen of Show. It was the Best in Show. That's Emmy Gray, which is one of their mystery roses. And here they are. This is where they hold their meetings. That's Greg Lowry down front from California. Greg and I were their two guest speakers for the 70th anniversary. So they're getting ready for their society meeting. And of course, you can't have a Rose Society meeting without cookie time. So theirs are very much like ours. This is Diana Antonician, one of their former presidents, and she also propagates roses at her house, many of which go into that society plant sale. And then she also sells to local nurseries. So they do have a nice way of distributing roses to the public on the island. If you visit in the spring, especially in March, one of the delights of Bermuda is freesias, which have been naturalized all over the island. And in early March, the whole island smells like freesias, which is a fragrance I really like. Well, let's talk about the mystery roses. I've got them here just listed. I'll talk about them individually. So Smith's Parish, probably the best known one. It is thought perhaps to be the original Fortune's 5-color rose. That has not been proven, probably never will be, but it's certainly a good candidate for it. It mostly makes white flowers. Sometimes they have a pink or a red stripe. Sometimes part of the flower will be red and the rest white. Sometimes you get an all red flower or an all pink flower. And if you take a cutting from an all red branch, you can get a plant that stays red or pink, and that one actually is registered under a different name as Red Smith's Parish. If you have not seen this rose and want to see a good example of it, the hedge along the east side of Ruth's Rose Garden is alternating plants of Smith's Parish and Red Smith's Parish. Often classed as a tea, but it has a lot of China influence. With these mystery roses, they're not real picky about what class they put them in. They consider mystery to be a class. It's perhaps the most disease-resistant rose that I know of. I've never seen black spot on it. And it's also probably the most chili thrips resistant rose I've ever grown in Florida. So just some pictures of it. This is the original plant in Bill and Lorna Mercer's garden in Bermuda that we got our cuttings from that came to the US. So as far as we know, all of the Smith's Parish being grown in the US, as well as all the Red Smith's Parish, came off of this bush. I kind of regret that because Bill told me that he had been trying for years to, by taking cuttings successively off of branches that only produce white flowers, he wanted one that would stay all white, and he was disappointed that it didn't work. So this was after many cutting generations trying to do that. And that's where I got my cuttings. And so something I always notice when I go to Bermuda, their Smith's Parish will have more red stripes much more commonly than ours do. And I think it's because we've got, our selection came from this mostly white bush. This is in the old Rose Garden. The far distance there is the Citrus Building where you all are sitting today. And if you were to look out those windows, this is where you would be looking. It's now just, of course, a big lawn, Mr. George's Green. But we had replaced the Double Delights by that time with alternating Red Smith's Parish and Smith's Parish. This flower was in Bermuda. I've never seen one do that in Florida. The next one then is Trinity. Trinity is a white tea rose, and that's quite unusual. I'm not aware of another tea rose that's really white. It was originally found on an infant's grave at Holy Trinity Church, and that is the grave you're looking at. That's not the original bush. the Bermuda Rose Society took cuttings of it and they were rooting them, and they went back for more and realized somebody had stolen the bush. So the only known copies of that rose were in the mist bed at Tulo Valley. And so eventually they replanted it on that site. That one, I don't know if it was stolen or died, but they lost it also. And so they're on at least the third planting of it there now, and I helped plant the third one. This is Holy Trinity Church. And this was my junior journey group. I think Alicia took that picture, so she's not in the picture, but that's a nice sized bush of it on that site. The lady in the blue hat is Lisbeth Cooper, who was one of their very important members of the society. Lisbeth's also gone now. So Trinity tends to have a pale pink bud, and then it opens to pure white. Very typical tea rose, easy to grow, pretty disease resistant. It does get some chili thrips, but otherwise it's pretty carefree. This is at Florida Southern. Pacific then was brought on a ship from the Pacific Ocean, which is where they got their name for it. It is almost certainly the same rose as we grow as Maggie. They look absolutely identical. And we've done some DNA work that also suggests they are the same rose. Probably a bourbon. It makes a big sprawling bush. So here it is in Bermuda. And if you grow Maggie, you'll recognize, oh yeah, that's typical Maggie. Then Agrippina is not really a mystery rose. This is the same as Cramoisie supérieure, but very popular in Bermuda and does well there. It's a typical red China, very disease resistant, makes a big spreading bush. If you've ever wondered how to tell the difference between Cramoisie supérieure and Louis Philippe, that can be a challenge if you're just looking at a flower or two, because the flowers can overlap in how they look. But in general, Agrippina will have a flower that goes more red to the center, whereas Louis Philippe will tend to have some white in the center. As I say, they can each make the other kind of flower. But the real giveaway is if you grow them without pruning them, Agrippina bushes will always be wider than tall, and Louis Philippe bushes will always be taller than wide. Carnation is a tall, narrow shrub. I don't know whether to call it a China or a tea. To me, it's kind of in between. And my only complaint about this rose would be that it does not cover itself up with flowers for a lot of the year. They're beautiful when they do occur. They make a decent cut flower, but you get a lot of bush for relatively little flower for a good part of the year. Sansi is a tea rose, pale yellow, almost thornless. It will ball in damp weather, but in dry weather, it's a beautiful thing. And it has been suggested that it might be Alexander Hill Gray or Amazon. As far as I know, nobody has really demonstrated exactly what it is, but it is a gorgeous rose. And if you need something that's thornless, it's kind of nice in that regard. Maitland White appears to be the same as what Antique Rose Emporium sells as Puerto Rico, and their plant came from Puerto Rico, which, as I pointed out back with the maps, is nowhere near Bermuda. So it's kind of a weird situation. We don't know where this rose came from, but being grown on both of those islands, it must be something that somebody knew what it was. It makes a very big bush. Could be a tea, but it really behaves more like an early hybrid tea. It opens palest pink and then turns white, especially in hot weather. Big, vigorous bush, always in bloom. It's one of my favorites. And then Papagontier, it's a climbing tea. You could grow it as a really big bush, but I like to grow it as a climber. There is argument about whether it's the real original Papagontier or not, but Greg Lowry at Vintage Gardens says it's not, and he has pretty good evidence. Papagontier was known to have sported to become the variety Rainbow. And Greg has Rainbow, which has sported back to the original Papagontier, which is not exactly the same as this one. So perhaps we should call it Bermuda's Papagontier. The flowers are quite variable, but most often like the one you see there, pinkish red with white freckles or flecks. These are very typical. But But in the white weather, you can get some peach on it. It is variable. And there it is at Florida Southern. That's an 8-foot tall arbor, so it'll get quite big. Belfield is a pure China, very compact growing, hardly ever will get to be even 3 feet tall. It's thought perhaps to be the original Slater's Crimson China. We can't prove that, never will really. But if it is Slater's Crimson China, then it is the ancestor of all modern red roses. It carried the genes for true red as opposed to orangey red or bluish red. Not a very shapely flower, but it always is a good red and a neat little bush. Emmy Gray, probably a China, maybe tea. Makes a big upright bush with small single flowers. This one, kind of like carnation, I guess if I had to complain about it, I would say it doesn't make enough flowers for the size of the bush, but individual flowers are really nice. Like a lot of Chinas, it starts out pale pink, and then the more the sun shines on it, the deeper it gets. It can turn almost red, especially in chilly weather. This is in Florida Southern's garden, and this is in St. George's, Bermuda. That's probably 6 or 7 feet tall. Bermuda's Kathleen is not similar to the original Kathleen. It's a big shrub, always in bloom, makes a lot of tiny hips if you leave them on it. If you like to do arrangements with hips, it's a good source of them. Probably a true China. The coloration works like mutabolus. It opens up pale, sometimes yellowish, turns pink, and then can turn red with age. But there has been some genetic testing, and it's certainly not a direct offspring of mutabolus, but they might be related. It's another one that deepens over time in the sun. And this is in Ruth's Rose Garden. That's probably 6 or 7 feet tall. This is not one that you'd like to use for cut flowers, but for just garden color, you could hardly beat that if you've got room for it. Spice is I wrote here it's a China. Again, you might argue that it had some tea characteristics. It's been suggested that this might be one of the original 5 stud roses, Hume's blush tea scented China. Again, that won't be proven probably. Very compact growing. Disease resistant, but it does get chili thrips, so you'd have to protect it from that. Very nicely fragrant, as its name implies, and as a cut flower, it lasts a long time, so it's kind of nice in that regard. Also a very compact bush. This one, I don't think ours ever got to be more than about waist high, maybe. Right Side Cream is a tea noisette. So it makes a big shrub or a moderate climber. I like to use it as a climber. This is it in Ruth's Rose Garden. Creamy white, and that's it going all the way over the top. That arbor is 8 feet high by 8 across. And there are 2 plants of it there. The near right and the far left pillars both have it. Vincent Godsif is probably a China. It is a hot purplish pink. When it blooms, it's one of those roses that people in a garden are attracted to it because it's just such an outlandish color. It also changes in the sun, so it can go from pink to purpley pink to red. It can make a fairly big bush, but it's always very dense and it blooms a lot, so it's a nice one for landscape color as well. Bermuda's Catherine Marmee is a tea, not the same as is sold elsewhere, including the US, as Catherine Marmee, but a nice rose in its own right. This is one that we didn't grow well for us at Florida Southern, and we lost it. I'm not saying it's a bad rose, just that we happened to lose our copy of it. Other people grow it very well, but I only have these couple pictures of it to show because I haven't had one in many years. Bermuda's Anna Olivier is thought actually to be a Toile de Lion, and I think that's almost certainly correct. Big tea rose. This is it, grown by Billy West in Australia. St. David's named for one of the parishes in Bermuda, is a red china. Makes a big bush. It's always in bloom. This is another one that's great in the landscape. Very carefree. Just always has flowers on it. Very disease resistant. Yellow mutabilis occurred as a mutation on mutabilis in Bermuda. It is a china. If you grow mutabilis, you realize it's a very large growing bush. Well, this one gets even bigger. This is perhaps the biggest shrub rose I've ever grown. The flowers start out more yellow than regular mutabilis does, and they turn less pink with age, although they do develop some pink. This is it in Ruth's Rose Garden. The big bush you're looking at there is yellow mutabilis, so you can see it does develop some pink. On the bottom right of that picture then is regular mutabilis, which with the much deeper color. And that bush is probably 6 feet tall by at least 8, maybe 10 across. And we butcher those back to knee high every year. So that's one season's growth. Miss Atwood is one of my favorite tea roses from Bermuda. Quite variable with the weather, from cream to pink to apricot. It's thought it might actually be Souvenir de Gabriel Drevet. Again, not proven, but a really nice tea rose. Makes a fairly big bush, as a lot of teas do. So some sources of these, A Reverence for Roses, Rose Petals Nursery, and Angel Gardens all carry some of them. I don't know if anybody carries them all, but good sources for them, and good plants to try growing on their own roots because they've been grown that way for many generations. You don't need to graft them. There are a few others that are not known to be in the US. And so I have a couple pictures of those. Cottage Rose and Alton. I don't know a lot about these. I see them when I'm in Bermuda. And the quarantine laws have changed in such a way that it's now almost impossible to bring plants in legally. People do smuggle plants. I don't really approve of that. It's nice to get a plant, but if you were to bring in some horrible new pest or disease, pretty much all of the pests and diseases we deal with were brought in from somewhere else. And chili thrips are a great example. And so I really recommend that people not try that. On the other hand, it's about the only way to get a rose into the US anymore from somewhere else. So these are a couple more, Portuguese Rambler and Talbot Rose. I think both of these are strictly once blooming. And again, I don't think they're here. And then Hayden Pink might be a sport of Cremoisie superior. They're very similar, except that it's always pink rather than red. But there are people in the Bermuda Society that don't think it's a sport, maybe a seedling, who knows, but a pretty rose anyway. Also not in the US. So I saw this poster at one of the gardens we visited. I thought that was appropriate. And with that, I'll stop and open up the room for questions.
Does anybody have questions?
I do. I have a question about if you visit Bermuda, can you go and, call up the Rose Society and just come and join them for, one of their meetings? Are they welcoming that way?
I didn't catch all of that, Carolyn.
If say I'm going back to Bermuda, would I be welcome to visit one of their meetings?
Yes, they love having visitors. Yeah. So they would be delighted. You could write to them ahead of time. They have a Facebook page and find out when they're meeting, and they would really enjoy that.
Good excuse to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Margaret?
Yeah. Malcolm, I bought right side cream from you probably a year and a half ago, and I put it on an 8-foot trellis, and it's got way too big for that. But when I was reading about pruning climbing roses, they said don't leave the canes in. Now, why is that?
You know, we used to weave them in our gardens at Florida Southern, and Stephen Scaniello talked me out of that. The problem there is if you've woven them in and then some of those canes die, which they're going to sooner or later, it can be a nightmare trying to get them out of there. So
Okay.
it's much easier to tie them to the surface of whatever you're using for your pillar. And then you can at some point, as we used to do in the little Jane Elizabeth Jenkins rose garden, when we had them on a trellis, you can actually untie them and lay the entire plant down on the ground, clean up the trellis, and then trim them and put back the canes you want where you want them. It's just a lot more convenient that way.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I don't think I'll go for option 2.
Malcolm, you have a question in the chat. I don't know if you want me to read it or if you can read it.
Oh, I can look for that. Hang on, I didn't have that open. Oh, question is that were these roses only used for beauty or were they imported for other purposes like medicine or cooking? I don't know that. I think well, the mystery roses, people don't even know if or when or how they were imported. So that's not known. I think there are people who do some cooking and that sort of thing with the hips, but I don't know that they were brought in for that reason.
Do you have any other questions?
Anybody? More questions? We are so pleased to have this presentation, Malcolm. We appreciate it. We like looking at your snow. We're glad we're not shoveling.
Well, I hope to keep growing roses happily, but I'm also becoming a fan of peonies. And so I'm delighted that they are enjoying being under that snow. That's exactly what they want and need at this time of year. So I'm happy for the snow. Glad it's snow here and not the ice they're getting farther south.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, we are looking forward to having you come next month when we're weeding and pruning Ruth's Rose Garden. Hopefully that is still on your schedule and you will be here, and we are recruiting as many people as we can to join in.
Wonderful. We can always use some labor crew. We appreciate that a lot. Well, thank you, folks. Appreciate your being here. I've enjoyed talking to you.